Hello, everybody. Hopefully you can watch us. We'll just take a few moments to get warmed up. I think the stream is working. Technology between us, we're thinking, oh my gosh, will it work? So this is our first live stream with a journalist. So we're really excited. Janey Lee Grace, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Really appreciate it.
No, it's great. Well, we're talking all about how to get radio ready. And obviously you are the radio queen, you've been doing radio, but not everybody that's going to be watching this will know about you. We obviously know that you're from BBC Radio 2, but how did you get into radio? Just give us a kind of overview, a snapshot of what you're up to and how you got there.
Okay, well, I was a singer originally, backing singer with lots of bands many years ago, and then I did my own kind of record, my own track, and was doing a kind of tour of stations around the UK, radio stations, and one of the guys interviewing me said, "Actually, we've got a few minutes. Will you just kind of read some of the weather or news or whatever it was?" And I said, "Yeah, why not?" And so I just started speaking on the radio and thought, this is fun. I could do this, if it all goes bad, I like this idea. And it didn't necessarily go bad, but I thought this is something I really enjoyed. So, reading out loud, it was quite fun. So I basically got myself some training and the rest is history. I worked at what is now BBC London, and back then it was called GLR. So that was my first show. I had my own show there, the Gospel Show. Which I produced and presented. And then from there, I worked at various other stations. I did a little stint at local radio, and then I worked at Virgin Radio for, 6 years, actually.
Wow.
When Chris Evans was there and when Branson owned it. And so, all those days. And then I did my own show on Radio 2, a early morning show for 6 years. And then across that same period of time, I was with Steve Wright in the afternoon. So, and that, I can't even begin to tell you, it's staggering. It's actually 19 years. 19 years. I mean, and I only know that because my son's age. I know that I started when just before my son was born. So otherwise, I just would have said, it's probably been 7 years. Wow. Time flies in radio.
Well, time flies when you love what you do as well, doesn't it, really,
true.
I suppose?
Yeah.
And that brings us on to, how has radio changed over the years? Because media has changed as a whole. How has it changed? What's the change you've noticed?
Well, that's a good question. I think it's less important that it's, national radio or local radio. I think there are so many other channels now. And I don't necessarily think that takes away from the listenership. I think people have a kind of portfolio of listens now, don't they? And most people will hop in the car and they'll put, whatever station is their favorite on, but then they'll get home and they'll listen to an online radio station or a podcast. And I just think the opportunities have grown. There's community radio, which who would have thought that would really take off? I mean, when I first started, your options were local radio, national radio, or hospital radio, if you were really lucky and you could get in, which no one could. But now, of course, it's, there's so much more. I mean, in addition to BBC Radio 2, I do a show on UK Health Radio, and I also do Hay House Radio. So just in my little world, there's 3 radio stations. So I think the opportunities are huge now.
And I think you're right. And I think almost radio has become almost back on trend again with the rise of podcasting and shows, as you would know, because you host your own as well. It's almost come back in fashion again, hasn't it? I think quite a few years ago with everyone being online and everything. But I know a lot of the radar figures now are climbing back up again. Have you seen that as well?
I think so. I think it is very popular, as you say. Podcasting is, the new rock and roll, and I think radio is just a step away from that, really. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't think I know anyone who doesn't listen to some kind of radio. I think it would be odd, wouldn't it? I don't know. Maybe that's just me because it's my world. But it is very addictive when you get involved in radio. I can warn you now, you won't get off that stuff.
Wow, brilliant, because that's what we're here for. We want to be able to share with everybody. So everybody that's watching this, that's in this group, is a business owner, is an entrepreneur, or is an influencer and wants to know how to kind of get on radio, either to share their story, a debate, or as an expert. So what we'd love to do is kind of go through any hints and tips that you can give us and insider secrets, really. So first of all, what's the point of anyone being on radio?
Well, I mean, it depends obviously what your goal is, but if your aim is to try and get your message out to a wider audience, then of course radio is just one of the best mediums that you're going to have, because you know, you don't know how many people are listening, but it's potentially, you know, thousands, millions, whatever. And it gives you a great opportunity to have a conversation. You know, whether you're hosting your own thing or whether you're being interviewed, it's an opportunity for people to hear the sound of your voice. It's so much more than just a blog post or something written, because, you know, we know that this phrase that I use all the time, and I'm sure you do, you know, people do business with those they like, know, and trust. And when they can hear you and hear you in conversation, they get a sense of what it is you're about. So, you know, it's one of the best, I think it's one of the best mediums there is, really. And also, you know, in some ways it's even better than telly. I mean, of course, TV is fantastic, and most people would like to think they could appear on TV, but it's out of reach for a lot of people. But in some ways, I think radio is much more immediate, because, you know, with radio, you know, we hop in the car, we switch the radio on, we hear a voice. Our subconscious mind kind of only takes a couple of seconds to get over the sound of the voice or the accent or whatever it is, and then we're straight into listening to the content. Whereas with TV, it's much more of a build-up. It's, oh, I've switched the TV on, or let me get, your subconscious mind is saying, okay, let's have a look. Where's the setting? Oh, I'm not sure about her dress. And all right, she's got a zit on her nose. That's unfortunate. And this is all your subconscious mind. You have to get over quite a lot before you actually get to the content. So there's something really very immediate about the medium of radio.
So you've been on both sides, in that you've obviously been a producer, you've been a presenter, but also you've been a guest, because you're also an author, you know, so you've been featured on radio stations. In terms of, you know, the success that businesses have had, or what you've seen, how has it helped businesses? How has it helped people's profiles?
Well, I mean, I can share my own story, which is, you know, which is that I wrote my first book, gosh, staggering 14 years ago now. Again, I only know that because my daughter was born that year. Don't try and write a book and have a baby within the same few months. Is just so not a good idea. Anyway, I did. And that was 14 years ago. And I sometimes say I was a little bit ahead of my time. I was writing about, you know, kale and coconut oil before they had their own publicists, you know. So my book was called Imperfectly Natural Women, and it was with a fairly small publisher, and who, interestingly enough, found me because of hearing me speak on the radio, but we'll maybe talk about that in a moment. But anyway, it was with a fairly small publisher, and when the book came out, it was nowhere. Like, no one was interested. It was in no bookshops. That time we did still have bookshops, if you remember back that far. But nobody was interested in stocking it, not one single copy. And I was totally and completely gutted, and determined that I wasn't going to let it go, you know, because this was like, you know, my baby, and not my second baby, as it were, and my life's work. And I put a huge amount into that book, and I really did not want it to just disappear. So I got myself onto a radio interview. I was very lucky. I managed to worm my way in, and I got onto Johnny Walker's show and talked about the book. And I just could not believe the response. I'd come away from the radio station, and then I can't remember what I was doing. A few hours later, the book went to #1 on Amazon bestsellers, which in those days was a thing. In fact, I think I knocked the Da Vinci Code off the top spot. Unbelievable. I mean, nothing else changed. One radio interview. I mean, publishers couldn't believe it. All of a sudden, you got Waterstones ringing up saying, can we have 500 copies? And we're saying, oh, really? But we rang you yesterday and you didn't want any. So that, you know, I really saw firsthand the power of a good radio interview. And I've seen it for many people. I really have. I've seen it in many cases. Having said that, though, and I'm sure we're going to go on to this, you've got to maximize your opportunity. I've also seen, the reason I do this work is because I have seen many people attract that amazing opportunity and not maximize it, and that's a bit heartbreaking. So I'm sure we'll go on to that.
Yeah, we will do. And it's really important that you leverage a radio interview. You talking about radio success. I interviewed one of the ladies last week, and she'd been featured on, she had an accidental radio interview with Chris Evans on the Virgin
Okay. Oh, cool.
show. And literally, they started talking about one of her jumpers, and the producer was wearing it on Instagram, and it literally went through the roof, the Instagram followers, and they invited on the radio, and she literally sold out of her stock, a year's stock in an hour. And now her business is 5 times larger than it was.
Absolutely.
Being on that one radio interview.
Well, yeah, that's so true. And in fact, going back to my experience, I was talking on that interview that I did about lots of brands that I recommended. So, you know, Johnny was asking about various, you know, cough remedies or whatever it was, or skincare. And I was just coming out with those names. And within the next few days, I had people saying to me, oh, I went into, you know, whatever it was, you know, homeopathic pharmacy to buy that thing you recommended. They'd completely sold out within a couple of hours, and they didn't know why. You know? So you're absolutely right. You know, the difference is amazing. Far more so than print media, actually.
I
Far
think
more so.
It's a bit more trusted, isn't it? It's like you say, it's a conversation. It's more natural. You're with the person that you know, that you're listening to, that you like, know, and trust.
Absolutely.
So, you know, they're interviewing someone that you're automatically going to trust them, and you just believe it a little bit more, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think for all of us, you know, we've had situations where we haven't necessarily tuned into an ad that we've heard on the radio or on TV, but we've heard somebody talking about a certain thing, and we've thought, okay, I'm going to go and buy that myself. I'm really interested in that. I know I've definitely done it. I've heard authors that I wasn't aware of at all talking about their books, and immediately gone and bought them. You know, I've heard, I remember, you know, when I think back, I wish I'd kept track of it, but there's definitely been many occasions where I've got a sense that I kind of like, know, and trust the person. So I want to find out more about them, purely on the back of a radio, you know, interview or debate or whatever it was.
So how does it work then? Obviously, you've done commercial and you've done BBC. So if you're interviewing somebody, obviously everybody that's watching this really would kind of looking to raise our profile, to get a mention of our business if we can. What's the kind of the rules, if you like, of mentioning our business? Do we leave that up to you? Are we allowed to mention? How does it work? Is it the bigger the channel, you know, the less name checks you put? What's your thoughts on that?
I think it really depends. Well, it depends what the station is, and it depends what the slot is, as it were, because it's going to be completely different depending on where you are. So if you're doing, you know, a commercial station, I mean, even a national one, as you say, that the person, you know, got a almost accidental bit of PR, if you like, on that show, and that was all about this specific product. That's what it was about. So of course it's you know, perfectly fine to be talking about the product. That's why they've been rung up. That kind of instance is rare. I mean, it doesn't happen a lot, really. That kind of thing is quite unusual. On commercial radio stations, obviously they want to sell ads. That's how they exist. So they're very, very rarely going to have somebody coming in on a show. I mean, most commercial stations don't have a lot of guests anyway, other than big time celebs. So they're very rarely going to have someone come on and talk about their range of skincare or whatever it is, because why would they do that unless they're a very big advertiser? And even then it doesn't sit right usually, you know. So this is one of the things I always say to people, you know, don't waste your time, you know, spending ages sending press releases and ringing up, you know, your local commercial station if you've never heard anyone on there promoting their business, because they ain't going to do it for you either. You know, it's very unlikely. So don't waste your time. Hear the slot first, as it were. Make sure that you've got the slot in your mind. So listen to local stations. Perhaps it's a BBC local station or it's a community station, and listen for the slots, because there will be some. But they're never as it's not as overt as, oh, I think I'll have a local business on now to talk about their product. You know, it doesn't work like that. It's all about the angle that you provide. So if you've got a great story attached to the brand that you have, or the service you provide, you're far more likely to be asked to you know, be on a radio show than if you're just saying, well, you know, I've got this new toy, it's made from elastic, and I think everyone should buy it for Christmas. Well, go to the advertising department then, because we're not interested, you know. But obviously, if you are an expert and you've got some amazing tips for parents who need to get their babies to sleep, and everyone, you know, it's coming up to Mother's Day and mothers are tired and everyone wants that kind of information. If you're then called in as that person to give those tips, and then you happen to have a smashing, you know, snuggly nightlight or whatever it might be, then obviously that goes with the territory. So it's about the peg, but it, you know, you really have to start with the angle, and that's where, as I'm sure you share all the time, you know, with your group, you know, it's the power of the story. It's your own story. It's the content that you can share. It's the angle that might be of interest to the listeners or the readers. Exactly the same as in print media.
Yeah, and it's really good, but we need to be reminded of it all the time. And what is comforting is, you know, it's not just a small business and solopreneurs that get it wrong. Big corporates still get it wrong too, because I've had press releases through that just literally put an advert together and think that's never going to get picked up.
It's not a press release. That's a sales release.
Exactly.
You know? Yeah, it's really true. You know, a press release is about something new or newsworthy. Yeah. That's what it is. And you're absolutely right. A press release is not, oh, I've got a great new product and it's $9.99. Why don't you buy it? That goes straight in the bin with most production rooms.
Exactly. So how do you spot a good story? And because a lot of us are frightened to put a press release together or think we've got to write a press release, but it's not always the case, is it? I think if you just put a headline and put an angle and like you say, it's a topical story or it's trending in the news or something, would you pick up on it, or would a producer pick up on it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a few different ways of going about this, of course. You know, one is that if you have a specific product, service, angle, story that fits with something that's current, then you know, by all means use what's going on. So, you know, be part of the zeitgeist, know what's coming up, so that you can pitch yourself and your stuff ahead of time. You know, if it's coming up to Valentine's Day or whatever, and you make, you know, whatever it is, little pink hearts, then obviously that's going to be, you know, your moment, but you're going to need a different angle for that. So, you know, and of course there are lead times and et cetera, et cetera. So one way is to make sure that you cash in, if you like, on anything seasonal or anything current or anything topical. So something that pops up in the news, if you know that you can contribute, then be ready to steam in with that, you know, so have something ready. But then, of course, in addition to that, you can be speculative and you can pitch yourself. You can pitch out the angles because, you know, let's face it, most journalists, most producers, they are time poor and they do have hours to fill and column inches to fill. And if there's a good story lands on their desk, then there's every chance they'll think about using it, particularly if you're pitching to your local radio station. They love featuring local people who have a good story.
Absolutely. And I suppose the local angle, isn't it, as well? So on that note, then, is it that what you've mentioned producers a few times, and we've covered this off, but it's good to hear it from you. Who is it that kind of books the stories? Is it the producers, or do sometimes the presenters have a kind of show? Do you all sit around a table, and how far in advance do you plan your stories?
Well, again, it will really vary for every radio station. It really, really will. I mean, you know, for something like UK Health Radio, an online radio station, your presenter is the producer and the email writer and everything else. You know, we do literally everything, and it's entirely down to us. And then at the other end of the extreme, you've got, you know, national radio stations where the presenter would rarely be involved. They might sometimes say, actually, I would quite like to bring in such and such a person, but yes, you'll have producers, you'll have researchers, you'll have a whole team of people. Normally, I don't know that it necessarily goes to a sort of committee, as it's too fast moving for that. It's usually kind of one producer or guest booker, depending on what kind of a show it is. I mean, for the show that I work on, Radio 2, it's mostly celebrities and authors, and so we have a guest booker, and the guest booker will just check in every now and again with the presenters and just say, oh, I'm booking this person, and you know, this person, are you okay with that? So and so's in town, you know. But that's really quite different to the local radio, where they will tend to be more kind of news based, or more they'll do more in their own locality. So and also they may have kind of slots, if you like. So they might have a show once a week where they feature charities, or they might have something where they look at parenting, or they might have a slot where they, you know, and that's your job really, to find out what those slots are. You know, you need to become a little bit of an investigative journalist, if you like, yourself, and and really find out where are these slots that your angle could fit into and that would benefit you and that they would love, because there you are, you're offering them some great content.
Absolutely. And also it's making sure that the radio station that you're going on, the time slot you've got, has got your audience as well, because also you're not just being on radio for radio's sake. You want to do it to obviously try and reach and share your story with your right community. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, another thing that I often remind people I'm working with is, when you're asked, if a journalist or producer comes to you and says, would you like to be on so and so radio show and talking about whatever, the kind of temptation is just to go, oh yes, lovely, thank you very much, what time shall I get there? 10 o'clock, perfect. Yeah. Or what time do you want me on the phone? Whereas actually you've got a bunch of homework, you've got a bunch of things you've got to tick off, the housekeeping stuff, because you've got to be exactly clear what angle they're expecting from you. And you've really got to know what kind of show it is and who the audience is, as you say, to make sure that you're the right fit, to make sure that you're going to get the tone of the show right. These things are really important. I had one client, and his thing was around sort of reframing your beliefs around money. From a kind of NLP perspective, and how you kind of reframe limiting beliefs around money. And he was asked to do a local radio show, and he just said, yeah, great. And then didn't do any prep, any research, went on this radio show, which turned out to be a mid-morning jock who's whole kind of raison d'etre in life is just to take the mickey out of absolutely everything. It's just all about rocking and rolling and having a laugh. And the whole kind of angle of the piece was around, oh, shall I get my midlife crisis Porsche now? Or, shall I get into debt for my midlife crisis, or shall I wait? And the fit was terrible. It was very, very uncomfortable. Yeah. Now the question is, had he have listened into the show, should he still have done the radio interview? And I would have said yes, but prep for that, prep for the fact that the guy's going to be having a big joke. So we can all be lighthearted. So, go along with that, and then bring in, okay, but let's just face it, sometimes people have money issues. So let's just talk about that. So he could have made it work, but it was the shock of the fact that he wasn't prepped and actually, I mean, a good producer will explain all of this, but they shouldn't have to, because really the onus is on you. Don't rock up to something that isn't going to be the right fit for you and the right audience, because it's a waste of everyone's time. It's going to sound uncomfortable.
Absolutely. And also you mentioned as well, whether you come into the studio, whether it's on the phone line, what's the kind of the percentage these days of going into a studio or doing an interview over a phone line, and any kind of recommendations or hints and tips around that bit?
I mean, I honestly couldn't tell you the percentage. I mean, in most real, in inverted commas, radio stations, you do still rock up and go in. Obviously, most BBC stations have their kind of little ISDN rooms where you kind of go and you sit in a little cubby hole. It's most disconcerting the first time you do it. You stare at a wall, literally, and then a voice comes out of nowhere, from BBC Radio Scotland, and says hello, and it's very odd. But anyway, they still do that within BBC stations. But then recently, in the last few years, I've done lots of interviews where I've literally just been on my phone. So I think that's happening more and more now. I think people just accept that actually all of us are able to cope with the sound quality being a bit crap, whereas years ago we weren't. Now we just are all used to that. I would say if it's a short interview and you're going to be on the phone just for, I don't know, 5 minutes, it's not a problem. If it's a long interview, if you're going to be, I mean, for example, I do Hey House Radio, and I have a full hour, almost an hour with the author. Now that's a long time, and if the author is on their mobile phone, I've got the full kind of proper kit. But if they're on their mobile phone, I had it just the other day with an author. It was exhausting, constantly cutting out, constantly. It was absolutely exhausting, and it's very uncomfortable. So just do everything you can to be wired.
Yes.
Just get on a proper phone, and if you possibly can, get a headset, or make sure you're close. I mean, these things are kind of basic, but they are really important.
Absolutely.
So if you're not going into the station, if you can't look at someone, which of course is best, but it doesn't always happen, then just make sure that you're going to have quiet, and you're going to be, you're close enough to your close enough to your microphone. It's usually the sound that lets it down big time.
Yeah.
More than anything. I mean, as with so many things, people do Facebook videos and lives and all sorts of things, and you can get away with how you look on camera, but if you can't hear someone, it's a real strain, and it puts you off completely if you can't hear properly.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I've been told before, and maybe can collaborate this, that because the quality of phones now is that, especially with commercial radio stations, sometimes they just want a soundbite, just a short soundbite. So if there's a story, like a national news story that you can comment on from a regional point of view, you could send a soundbite potentially in to the radio producer to say, look, in light of this breaking story, I can give you a comment. Have you come across that before? I mean, I've spoke to local producers before that have done that.
I mean, I haven't personally, because it's not the world I'm in, but I can absolutely understand how that would work. I mean, basically, you've got to think from their perspective. If they've got some kind of story kicking off, they need something fast moving. They have not got time to ring around auditioning people. So if you can speak and you've got something to say, make it super easy for them. Leave a message on their answer phone and just say, here's my take on it, and here's my number, and they may or may not call you back. So absolutely. Anything you can do to be proactive, if you know that they're going to be looking for your angle on something, is always good. And of course, make sure that your local station has got a copy of your your kind of pitch, if you like, so that they know how to get hold of you if something comes up that's is the topic you talk about, if you see what I mean.
And I was just going to come on to that. So there's two bits to that then. You're saying it, make it super easy. Can they send their intro, if you like? So the journalist or the presenter has like an intro, like a bio, I suppose, so they can introduce you. Is that the normal? And then, like you say, the outside, this is where they can find you. Is that okay to do that?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely critical to do that, actually. They may or may not ask for it, but I think it's really your absolutely best practice for you to just do that anyway. So for you to, when you kind of pitch to them or you email them or whatever it is, here's how I'd love to be introduced, if possible. So literally, and you write it for speech. So nobody wants to know about, whatever diplomas you got or whether you passed your driving test or, we're not interested. Just 2 lines max, maybe one. It's just, how would they introduce you? So write it for speech. Okay, so say it out loud and make sure the tense is correct. And then similarly at the end, how do you want to be back announced is the expression. What's the credit? How do you want to be credited? And usually, you asked earlier how one gets one's plugs in. So let's take, for example, an author, and you've just your book has just come out, you want to be invited onto a show. You could, let's supposing they're going to invite you onto the show, send them an intro that says, this is how I'd love to be announced, whatever name is the author of XX and runs the charity XX or whatever. And then your payoff line, your back announcement is XX is the author of XX, published by X. That's it. And when you've done those 2 bits, they may or may not ask you for other information. They might say, or give us some more notes for production notes, or they might find their own production notes. Yeah. But if they've got those 2 basic bits, you then shouldn't need to keep saying, oh, well, as you'll find out if you've read my book called X, because actually nothing's more annoying. It's really, really annoying. And it's totally unnecessary, because if the conversation is interesting, people will wait to the end to find out what the name of the book is. And if the presenter is, really so unprofessional that they don't mention your book, that person will still go and find out about it, because they've heard your conversation. Whereas if they've heard you 3 times say, oh, well, you'll find the answer to that in my book, it's just annoying.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree, and they're really good points. But it's great to hear you say it, which is because it really does help us, but it also gives us the confidence to know, oh yeah, I am doing it right, or this is the approach. One of the things you talked about, you said before as well about, perhaps put your credentials forward, tell them what you're an expert in. Yeah. So, is that okay? Again, so just to say, might have a story at the moment, but you could just approach and say, look, I'm a health lifestyle writer. This is the topics. If I can help you with anything. Yeah. Because do they keep contacts in their little black book?
Yes, I think most do, because we never know. You never know when stories are going to pop up. So yeah, they definitely do. I mean, it's worth redoing that from time to time because producers change. I had a run where I was on BBC Breakfast Television, a lot, and then all of a sudden I got absolutely nothing. It took me ages to dawn on me that the producers had changed. So, and they hadn't passed on their contacts, so no wonder I wasn't getting anything. So yes, do it regularly, but I would be slightly more specific than that. So to use the example you gave, if someone is a health and well-being expert, I mean, that can mean anything. So I'd be more specific. I'd say, I'm a health and well-being expert, and I can comment on topics such as organic skincare for babies, filtered water or whatever. So give them 4 or 5 things so that they don't have to work too hard to get the gist of your angle on something. Does that make sense? So, you be a little bit more specific without sending reams of text. I mean, one of the things that annoys me most, and it happens a lot, is someone will pitch to me and they'll say, I'd love to be interviewed by you or whatever. I'd love to work with you. Here's a link to a paper I wrote, in 1908 or something. And there's this mad long, what? And I'm not going to, no offense, but I'm not going to read that, or they'll say, you can find out all the information about me on my website. Well, no offense, but I'm not going to do that right now. They need to lay it out for me. I might go to their website if I've already decided that I'm really interested in them. But what I want laid out directly in front of me is, I'm this person, I do this, right? Here's my angle on this. And then I might think, oh wow, that's exactly what I'm looking for, because that's a unique angle on something I want to cover for my radio show. So yeah, now I will go and have another look. But you have to spell it out. You have to make it easy for journalists and producers, because they're mad busy.
Well, absolutely they are, and that was on my list. I've got a list of questions here, which we've mostly ticked off actually, and we've got a few from the members that had questioned it, was what not to do. So I guess is there any other kind of like things that get do you want things personalized to you? Because a lot of people send generic stuff. Does that annoy you? It's the things that we should not do. I know we know that you shouldn't mention yourself too many times. Don't be concise with your angles and your approach, and give them all the details. Is there anything else not to do?
Well, are we just talking about pitching, or are we talking about once you get on the air?
And once you get on the air, anything to do with radio, any help you can give us?
Well, just back to the pitching for a moment. I think, I mean, they're the basics. Just give people the story. Make sure that they know that you're going, and you might want to show them, offer them a link to something you've done, so that they can just check that you can speak. They might just want to check that, or that your video or whatever. But then really the big one is, once you do get the opportunity, is do your preparation, because the reason I do this work, and again, you've probably heard me say it before, is because I have seen so many people who turn up and they haven't in any way prepped any bit of their interview. They've just rocked up. So then the questions they're given may not be the questions they're expecting, and they're so poor at answering them. And what you have to remember is that an interview is not an exam, it's a conversation, but it's your job to have your agenda to get your message across within a conversation. We're not politicians. We're not aiming to be massively controversial and just answer a completely different question to the one that was asked. That wouldn't be right for most people watching this interview. But take a tiny leaf out of that book, do a bit of prep, decide what it is you want to talk about, because that way you can help shape the conversation. And then the other big tip is recognize that, being on radio, being interviewed, it is a performance of sorts. I mean, yes, you are you are, you need to be natural. It's a conversation. But by the same token, I wouldn't be so relaxed that you're kind of burping through it, and I have I've had people like that. So relaxed that, they're not even slightly in performance mode, and you do need a little bit of that.
Yes.
And if you do your preparation, you're less likely to be overcome with nerves to the extent that you bail out. I've seen that happen too. I've seen people literally frozen, live radio and live TV. It's happened to me as a presenter. I did one of my very first ever live TV shows. I was nervous enough. It was live TV and I've got my little thing in my ear. Yeah. And I ask a question of the guy opposite, and he literally froze. I could see the fear in his eyes. Oh my goodness, across the studio, there was the fear in his eyes. I knew that he had no idea what the question was or how he was going to answer it or where we were. It was literally frozen with fear. So I managed to continue my question, and practically ask him what was his name, and he managed to come back. But, I now know, looking back, that had he have realized that he was going to be in what was quite a nerve-wracking situation, had he have rehearsed some of his own lines, yeah. It would have gone more smoothly. Yes, he still would have been nervous, but it would have gone more smoothly. You have to put the work in. No one would go and run a marathon having never done a trial run.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to go on to, and I'm going to ask you a couple of questions that people put in. We're going to go in a minute into how people can actually get to kind of pitch that to you direct and actually ask their questions to you and get to meet them. So you're going to talk about coming up soon. So keep watching, because this is the juicy bit on how you can kind of get to know Janey Lee Grace on a much more personal level, so you can understand key messages and not freeze, and she'll help you with all these things. But you've just been brilliant, Janey. You really have. I've just got a couple of questions that did come in. So we've had a couple of questions, if that's okay. So what are the best ways to pitch ideas that will enable you to share about your business while still being focused on delivering useful information to the listeners, i.e. pitfalls to avoid so your pitch isn't too much like a promotional advert? Well, we've kind of covered that off, really, haven't we?
I think so. I think it really is just, you start with the angle that they want. It's all about the angle that they're interested in. I'm just trying to think of an example. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but I do know that anything that's personal, anything that's relatable is going to be of interest, and newsworthy, relatable, current in some way, or a personal story. The kind of things that you like listening to yourself, really.
Yeah, and also then this is a good this lady here, Sarah Ross, who's one of our members. She's the burnt out recovery expert, helping executives and entrepreneurs reset, recharge, and thrive after burnout. What a great intro, that she's done for herself. Her question is how to keep topics fresh if you keep doing a lot of media in one period.
Well, it's interesting you say that, you see, because usually within the media, if you think about it, stories will pop up, and there'll be someone talking about it, and you'll hear them perhaps on I don't know, on our program on Radio 2, or you'll hear them on a local station. Then you'll see them on the one show, and then you'll see them somewhere else, and actually it's the same story, it's the same stuff. So there's two ways of answering that. One thing is just, if this is your shtick and your angle, then I would just stick to it. If you're going to be interviewed by different people, there'll always be a slightly different take on it anyway.
Yeah.
But I suppose if it's your own radio show, for example, or your own podcast, well, then obviously you've got to think of lots of different angles of the same thing. But I wouldn't veer off on too many tangents if you've got your one angle and your one story, because actually it can be rammed home in lots of different ways.
Yes. Yeah, no, it's a good point, actually. And obviously, I think it's like you said, it's just a conversation, isn't it? And it's being prepared, but not being so prepared that you're not talking naturally back.
Yeah, I think exactly. It's having it's preempting what are the questions they're likely to ask you, i.e. what do most people want to know?
Yeah.
And you balance that against what is it you want to say. And let's hope the two meet somewhere, let's hope. But then be prepared for some curveball questions that you weren't expecting, and decide in advance how you're going to handle those. because, you know, again, it's something that we've spoken about before, but, you know, a lot of people have stuff that they definitely don't want to talk about.
Yeah.
Often when I'm working one-to-one with clients, I'll say to them, okay, you know, what's the question you don't want to be asked? You're worried about being asked. And that's actually the gold. The gold is usually right there. So that's not to say that you have to spill out every bit of, you know, of everything in your closet.
Yeah.
But you need to know, if you are asked about something that you don't want to talk about, you need to know how you will handle that question.
Yeah, brilliant. And that brings us on to being able to contact you and kind of get closer to you, getting backstage access, if you like. So what we've agreed to do, Janey's done this interview with us so we can kind of share all the insider secrets to radio. So I'm hoping you've learnt lots. I'm sorry I haven't asked any questions that come in if they're down below, because being completely honest, this is our first live that I've done within Media Matchmaker, so it's going in and using technology, but we will get some and I'll answer them individually. But we've got coming up a date for you in the diary, and I'm going to try and put the link in now for you, which is it's a Meet the Journalist event, and it's going to be online like this. So Janey and I are now recording this and speaking to you live over Zoom, but you're going to be in Zoom with us. You're going to be on a Zoom meeting with us, and it's going to be on October the 8th, Tuesday, October the 8th at 4 o'clock. Now, what this is going to be doing, it's going to be a session where you get to ask all your questions, and we're going to be diving a lot deeper on how to get you ready. So it's more about positioning your key messages and how to kind of, like Janey said, don't be the politician, but get your key messages across with the interview. So you've got your own agenda with it. And also talking about things like how to, those curveball questions that you mentioned, and how to make sure that you are prepared for things like that. So it's going to be a Meet the Journalist event. So I'll put the link in. You can register your ticket to come on. So anybody, you know, part of Media Matchmaker, you can register for the event. We know that these tickets will get snapped up fast, so please register sooner rather than later. It's going to be up to an hour. It will be over Zoom. And the exciting part is, as well, is not only will you get to ask your questions live on video with Janey, just like this, you will also, you know, some of you will be able to pitch your story too. So we're going to kind of go through some real scenarios on what makes a great story, aren't we, Janey? So
yeah.
Have I missed anything off on that? And I'll try and share the link with this while you're kind of explaining on how we're going to go into it a bit deeper.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've said it all perfectly. I don't know what else I can add. I mean, I think I think it's actually really good for people just to spend a little bit of time just thinking, okay, which elements of what I do would be a good story. So yes. Even just thinking, you know, thinking of those things. I mean, it sounds a bit ridiculous, but just listening through some channels, you know, go online and listen through some little sections of shows, and just catch hold of something where you can imagine yourself right there. Yeah. Talking to that journalist, to that producer or presenter, and then you know you're on the right path, really.
Brilliant. No, it's going to be brilliant. And as I say, we've kind of gone through it already. We've been so excited about sharing all this stuff with you, and we want to help you even further. And we also know you've got some great stories, and also there's going to be a way that, you know, that you'll be able to share your story and also potentially have an interview with Janey Lee Grace, which is really exciting. So I think, I have no idea if I have, but I think I've put the link in. But if you're watching this on replay, it will be there for you, so you'll be able to enter the details. So the question is, it's going to be on the 8th of October, and it's on Tuesday at 4 o'clock. It will be in Zoom, so you'll register your details in to secure your spot, and then it'll be over like this scenario like this, where we can chat to Janey and actually ask the questions. Janey, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It's been great.
It's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you. And guys, I hope you've enjoyed it. Hopefully you feel a little bit more confident. You know, we shared some insider secrets to get onto radio just a couple of weeks ago, nowhere near to the level of what we've just shared with you today. And one lady in the group already has come back and said, oh, I secured a radio interview.
Fantastic.
So it really does work. So, you know, just be brave, take on board some of the steps. There'll be a replay so you can watch this, and good luck with getting radio ready, and hopefully you can join us on Tuesday the 8th. Janey, I'm going to hang up now. If I cut you off, we'll go back online, but to everybody else, thank you so much, and I'll see you soon. Take care.